With the start of a new year, let's stop and think about what we want in the year ahead. And while we may know what we'd like to accomplish, what we end up doing are often two different things.
If we have some goals and some priorities that we want to accomplish in our business this year, let's get those scheduled and let's figure out when we're going to do it and get it on the calendar ahead of time.
Consultant and coach Allan Crockett returns as a guest as we discuss what we can do to be effective in the next year.
Anytime we're overwhelmed, we don't make good decisions.
From setting goals to identifying the obstacles in front of achieving those goals, Allan provides insight as to how we can move off of center.
When you're self-employed, how do you hold yourself accountable to do the things that you ought to be doing? And sometimes we let ourselves get away with things that we would never let anybody else get away with.
How can we start the new year off right? Tune in on this episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show. And we welcome you here to 2024. This is the first episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills, and we are glad to have you tuned in. For all of you that have been regular listeners to the program, we thank you for tuning in. And if this is your first time listening to the show, we hope you enjoy it and hope you stick around for the entire show. By the way, if you do hear something you like and you want to go back and listen to it again, you can go to the podcast website at workingranchradio.com. You can download any show that's out there that we've had. This is episode 151. So you can go back and listen to all of those that you want to go to. And of course, you can also find it on any podcast provider out there as well. Well, to get a new year started and underway for the Working Ranch Radio Show, I thought I'd be like kind of everybody else and just kind of have a New Year's resolution focus in mind with that. And so I decided to invite a great friend of mine, Mr. Allan Crockett, who's a ranching consultant and a business coach, to join us here on our program today. And Allan, thanks for joining us here today on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Always a pleasure, Justin. Good to be with you. Happy New Year.
You too. You too. You know, as I was preparing in my mind for what I wanted to do for the first show to kick off in 2024, just like anybody else, we're always thinking about, okay, we want a good start to the year. We want to get some good things going so that we have a great year. That's, I think everybody would be in agreement on that. So you were the first guy I thought of. I thought, you know, you've worked with me on different occasions and I appreciated that. And so I wanted to reach out to you as we look at the front end of this year and know that it can be a point in time to where we start some things and maybe start some good habits instead of reverting maybe back to some bad habits. And it shouldn't really matter that January 1 is when we have to start those, but it is when we're just going to accept that that's when it is. And really for a lot of us, it is a time where we do reflect and try to set some New Year's type resolutions.
You know, you're right, Justin. And you know, if we're on a calendar year as far as taxation is concerned and that kind of thing, well, we close the books out December 31st and we start fresh on January 1st. And so it is that time. You mentioned New Year's resolutions, and it's interesting because I don't know how, I probably haven't set a New Year's resolution in 30 years. And part of that is because it was kind of easy come, easy go. You know, I'd set a resolution and within a short period of time, I'd forgotten about it. And I read some studies on that, and that's not atypical. I mean, that's pretty typical. Mm-hmm. We set New Year's resolutions, and usually they're things like, I'm going to eat healthier, or I'm going to exercise more, or I'm going to have a deeper relationship, or, those kinds of things. Well, what does January 1st have to do with doing that? I mean, if we need to eat healthier, it doesn't matter what day of the year we figure that out. We should start then. If we decide in October we ought to start eating healthier, okay, well, let's wait till January and we'll start doing that. Well, it doesn't make any sense. So, yeah. But for a lot of business things, we take a fresh look, on January 1st, and we set some goals for our business, and it's a great time of year to really look and say, what do we really want to accomplish this year? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. As I had said, you were one of the first guys that I thought of about having this sort of a conversation, partly because several years ago, you and I worked together. I was feeling overwhelmed with some of the things, all of us are busy and we all have things to do. And pretty soon the ranch work starts getting to be overwhelming and different things begin to get overwhelming. And one of the first things that for you and I, it was simply an element of, okay, let's get some time management. Let's get some things underway there, and let's begin to look at that. And so really, as we start this conversation here today, we're going to talk about a lot of different things, but let's start there, because I think that's one thing for folks that, they're thinking about, okay, we left last year. Yeah, it's a clean slate in some ways, but at the same time, there's still things that are going to have to get done. And how do we address that so that we don't feel overwhelmed each and every morning when we wake up?
That's really, really a good place to start. Stephen Covey had a quote a long time ago, and I think that's where it came from. I've heard other people say, but I think it started with him. But he says time management is really a misnomer. The challenge is not to manage time, but to manage ourselves. And then he went on to say, the key is not to prioritize what's on your schedule, but to schedule your priorities. And I think that's where we really need to look at it. It's okay, if we have some goals and some priorities that we want to accomplish in our business this year, let's get those scheduled and let's figure out when we're going to do it and get it on the calendar ahead of time. Because if we get caught up in the day-to-day, like you were talking, then the overwhelm comes. And anytime we're overwhelmed, we don't make good decisions. It's hard to see the forest for the trees kind of thing. And if we're overwhelmed in day-to-day operations, then we just don't take time to sit down and do the strategic planning, set the goals, figure out where we need our business to go to provide us the lifestyle, the profit, the quality of life that we desire. And really, to me, that's what it's after. We're after quality of life that comes because we have time to do the things we want to do. We have money because we're profitable to do the things we want to do. And also because we have good health and we can enjoy that, and the relationships, and then our purpose becomes more focused and where we want to spend our time. So if we can kind of look at those things, it's a matter of saying, okay, this is a priority. I'm going to get this on the calendar, and I'm going to make sure it happens.
Mm-hmm. So you said it begins to start to set a schedule, put that in a schedule, whatever that's going to be. Let's start with that process and some of the things that you would advise starting at point one and working on down.
Yeah. So I like to take a 3-year look at things. If we go out 5 and 10 and 15 years, that's so far out that there's no urgency to it.
Yeah.
But if we come back to 3 years and say, okay, where do we want our business to be 3 years from now? And if we can hone in on that and really focus on that, then we can break that up and say, okay, if we're going to get to that point in 3 years, where do we have to get to in 2 years? And where do we have to be at the end of this year? And now that we know where that is, now we can really focus on this year. And so what I like to do there, Justin, is say, okay, here's all the things that need to happen in my business this year to keep me on track so that I'll be where I want to be in 3 years. And let's break that down and let's get those on the calendar. And I look at it on a monthly basis. And let's figure, because there's some things that probably need to be done in January. There's some things that probably we don't need to worry about until September, October, November. But let's figure out what those things are and get them in some kind of chronological order by month on the calendar, or at least on some Post-it notes that we can move around and shift around and then get them on the calendar. Once we know what needs to be done in each month, what I like to do is, okay, let's just break it down in January. We have 4 weeks in January. Here's 2 things that need to be done in January. Let's get them on the calendar. Where they fit in there, and make sure that they fit, and make sure we don't have other things pushing them aside that, like you said, the everyday side of the business. And then when we get them on the weeks, then every week we just take a look at that. Say, okay, here's what's going on this week, and we can plan our days accordingly. One of the things, going back to Stephen Covey, that's one of the things that he taught, is planning on a daily basis just puts us in crisis management, because we just look at all the things that have to be done today. And so planning more on a weekly basis gets the urgency of the crisis today out of the way, and we can look at that. So that's kind of the broad spectrum of what I look at. A 3-year plan, break it down by years. And once we get this year figured out, let's break it down by months and make sure we get all of that on the calendar.
Mm-hmm. I think let's take a break here right now, Allan, because the next topic and conversation we're going to get into is going to require a little bit of a longer answer, and I don't really want to break that up. So let's take a break here. My guest today is Allan Crockett. He's a ranch consultant, business coach, a friend of mine for many, many years. We're going to come back with him as we're just talking about today how we can get this new year started off on the right foot. Before we head to break here, today's segment brought to you by the American Gelbvieh Association. Make your crossbreeding count with Gelbvieh and Balancer Genetics. Find out more at gelbvieh.org. We're going to take a break. We'll be back on the Working Ranch Radio Show after this.
Capitalize on crossbreeding with Gelbvieh and Balancer bulls. Raise replacement females with added fertility, increased longevity, and greater productivity. Gelbvieh and Balancer influenced females wean more pounds of calf per cow exposed. In the feed yard, Balancer influenced cattle offer increased performance, improved feed efficiency, and have excellent carcass merit. Balancers add the pounds, make the grade, and deliver the value. Make your crossbreeding count with Gelbvieh and Balancer Genetics.
Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills. My guest today is Allan Crockett. He's a friend of mine. He's also a ranching consultant, a business coach for folks. We'll talk more about his business here later on as we wrap up our conversation with him, because if you are finding yourself in that need where you need some sort of accountability in what you're doing and wanting to do and make some improvements, we can visit with Allan a little bit about that. In fact, Allan, at the break, I didn't bring that up. That was something I did want to talk about, because we talk about all these things, and I really think at the end of the day, accountability is also a big part of making this all happen too.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if we don't have accountability, we're in a world of hurt, and so that's it's part of the challenge, in ranching and farming and any kind of small business where you're an entrepreneur and you're quote unquote you're self-employed. Mm-hmm. How do you hold yourself accountable to do the things that you ought to be doing? And sometimes we let ourselves get away with things that we would never let anybody else get away with. Mm-hmm. If we had a hired manager or a hired hand that was, doing some of the stuff that we do, we'd fire him. but we allow ourselves to get away with things. And part of that is because it takes an extreme amount of discipline to sit down and do strategic planning. Mm-hmm. And it's easier just to look out the window and see 100 things that we could go do, like putting out salt or putting out mineral or go check water or break ice, whatever it is, what time of year it is, move cow. And that just seems so much more enjoyable than sitting down and doing some strategic planning. So it requires a certain amount of discipline, especially because we don't have accountability partners typically as entrepreneurs and small business owners and self-employed people. We don't have accountability partners. And so it's easy to get away with things that we shouldn't allow ourselves to get away with. And so it requires discipline. It's kind of like, if you're going to really work out, mm-hmm. if you have a buddy you're working out with or two or three guys, it's a whole lot easier to stay on task when everybody knows that, 6 o'clock in the morning, we're going to be at the gym working out. Mm-hmm. Because if it's just me, I don't really feel like it today, or it's too cold, too hot, too whatever, I'm too tired, I'm too sore, I got too many things to do, and so we can skip that. Mm-hmm. So it's funny, with the discipline that comes in that and having some accountability is huge. I think there's a couple other things, Justin, maybe that would help our listeners kind of understand some things here. One is we got to get over this idea that we can do it all ourselves and stop thinking that we have to do it all ourselves. We need to be able to delegate. And if we're running ourselves ragged and trying to do it all ourselves, it's time to hire somebody or somebodies. And sometimes, there's an area there where maybe we're not quite as profitable as we would like to be. And so we're trying to reach that profitability target so that we can hire somebody else so that we don't have to do it all ourselves. But sometimes we have to take a leap of faith and say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and hire somebody and start delegating and free myself up to do some of the more important things that I ought to be doing, and trust that this person that I hire can take care of the things that I'm doing out there, and so that we can reach our goals and really work the plan that we put together. Mm-hmm. Another thing is and we've all experienced this, it's faster and better if I do it myself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I know what to do. I know how to do it. I can go do it. And it's just faster and I do it better. And, you know, we've seen this with our kids. You go back when little kids, I want to help my son make his bed or my daughter make her bed. It's so much easier if I just do it myself.
Mm-hmm.
But the child never learns to make a bed if we do it for them all the time. And so we have to step back and realize, it might be faster and better if you do it yourself or if I do it myself. But there comes a time we have to turn loose of that and delegate that out. And really, when I look at that, I like to look at the old 80-20 Pareto principle. And, you know, what's the 80% that I can turn loose of and the 20% that I really need to focus on? And that 20% has to be the high level strategic planning things, the things that will really create profitability for my business, that will really create quality of life for me and my family and my employees. And the only way I can do that is get rid of that 80% that I don't need to be doing, that somebody else can do. And yeah, maybe they didn't do it quite the way I would have done it,
mm-hmm.
you know, and maybe it's not, maybe it took them longer to do it than I would have done it myself, but so what?
Mm-hmm.
You know, the job got done, and what I did in my 20% was so much more important for my business than that other 80%. It becomes really, really huge. And so, you know, this is a good time of year to sit down and just say, okay, well, what's the 20% that I need to hang on to? And what's the 80% that I can delegate? Mm-hmm. And who can I delegate that to?
Yeah. You know, and I think along those same lines of that part of it too, Allan, and this is something for me having to work through now as I have a hired hand and my nephew that works for me, Tristan, that works for me. And then of course I have my kids that are helping me out as well. And that goes to the next step of really, once you have identified what are some of those roles that you could let go of, is putting that down in a process or on a sheet of paper that identifies what the expectations are to achieve, not necessarily always the means of how you get there, but what are the expectations at the end of the job.
Yeah, and I really like to look at that just as agreement. You know, let's just come to an agreement that this is the outcome that we're after. This is the result that we're trying to accomplish here. And as long as an employee can stay within some guidelines on that, how they get there, we ought to create some freedom for them. You know, going back to Covey, and you know, he had the acronym Dr. GRAC, mm-hmm. and the D is desire, the R is results. So here's the desired results. Here's the outcome that we're after. And then the GRAC is here's some guidelines. The R is the resources we have available. The A is the accountability, how we're going to measure that. And then the C is the consequences. Number one, to the business if it doesn't happen. And number two, to the employee if it doesn't happen. And so if we look at that and say, okay, how can we utilize Dr. GRAC to help us with our employees? Well, it's Mr. and Miss Employee. Here's the desired result that we're after. Here's some guidelines. I want you to stay within these guidelines. Here's the resources you have available to you. It could be time. It could be money. It could be equipment, it could be a horse, it could be any number of things, but here's the resources. And then here's how we're going to measure accountability, and here's the consequences. And if we can do that, we come to an agreement, and anytime we have an agreement, that really raises the bar substantially higher than expectations. Mm-hmm. If we can come to an agreement, and if the employee says, yeah, I agree to that'll work, I can get that done, and I understand, then we move our businesses way forward than we could ever take them ourselves.
Mm-hmm. I think that's probably as beneficial it is to the employee or the son or the daughter that's working for you or whatever that may be. Probably equally important for the boss too, because you've taken the time to put that out on paper to realize that really this is all that needs to be done. In our minds, we think, going back to what you were saying a little bit ago, we're the ones that always think we're the only ones that can do it. When in reality, it's not. I mean, there's a lot of work on a ranch or a farm situation that can be done by anybody. In certain cases, I don't want to downplay the certain people's skills that are working for you, but at the same time, if they're given the guidelines, here's what I want, here's the outcome, and so as an employer, it kind of puts my mind at ease to know, well, here it is.
Yeah. And as long as we're clear on that, it makes it so easy, or so much easier. And it allows us to go do that 20% that we ought to be doing. It allows us to do that and not be distracted worrying about the other 80%. Yep. Now, one of the things, and you know this, Justin, and our listeners do too, I'm sure, but we need to talk about it, is it takes time to train people to do things the way we want them done, and to teach these desired results, because it could be, we have 20 or 30 or 50 different desired results we want in our business, on the ranch or a farm. And each one of those is going to have a set of guidelines and some resources available, and then the accountability and the consequences. It takes time to do that. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, if we don't take the time to do that, then we find ourselves, in the same rat race.
Overwhelmed.
And as Robert Kiyosaki said, the problem with winning the rat race is you're still a rat. So we don't want to be the rat that wins the rat race. Let's get off that hamster wheel. Let's get out of the rat race, and let's become the leaders of our business that our business needs us to be, and take that 20% and delegate the other 80. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing about that, Justin, is down the road, a year or two from now, our 20% that we took today will be our 100%, and we'll find another 80% in there that we can delegate, and we'll have a new 20%. Mm-hmm. And our business will expand and grow, and our mind will expand and grow. And the better we get at delegating, and the better we get at helping employees grow in their position in the business, the better we're going to be, and the better quality of life that we'll have, and the faster our business will grow and get us there.
Yeah. We have one more segment we have with Allan, and in the very first segment we kind of kicked it off with, time management concepts and some things like that. But originally that was getting down to really putting a time frame and a plan on when things are going to get done. In this next segment, we're going to talk more about that as we talk about strategic planning and some of those kind of things, setting goals and identifying obstacles. So stick with us. We'll be back on the Working Ranch Radio Show after this.
Nothing delivers a better return on investment like cattle health. Set up the next generation for lifetime performance with Zinpro Avela 4. Achieve reproductive success in your herd with a 20% increased conception rate and a 16-day tighter calving interval. Calves from cows supplemented with Zinpro have stronger immunity and 28 more pounds at weaning. Help protect your profits by partnering with Zinpro.
And we welcome you back here to the Working Ranch Radio Show. The focus of our program today is just really getting the new year started off on the right foot. It's kind of ridiculous sometimes that we use the front end of the calendar to be that motivator, but nevertheless it does happen. And so with that in mind, today as we are talking about ways that we can be more efficient, more effective in what we are doing on a weekly basis, daily basis to a weekly basis, monthly and on out. And so with that, my guest today is Allan Crockett. And Allan, we've talked a little bit at the very first segment, we talked a little bit about time management, being a part of it. Really, it was self-management, and began to put into our schedule the things that we do need to get done and being a big part of that. As we start, as you had suggested, that really it was about looking at not really getting into the 5 and 10 year far out look at what you want to see accomplished, but maybe narrowing it down into 1 to 3 type year deals. And so with that in mind then takes us to the step here of identifying what are these goals, and then at the same time we're going to be identifying what are the obstacles that are in front of that to get us from achieving that goal. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think part of it in the very beginning, we have to get really clear about where we want to go and what we want our business to do. And some people listening to this might be thinking, I'm ready to retire. I want to figure out a way to pass my business on to the next generation or to a neighbor or somebody else. I want to completely get out of it. Somebody else might be thinking, I've got kids that are teenagers and I got to figure out a way to get them back into the business. I want them to be here. They want to be here. Others might already have some employees and just be figuring that, I want to grow this and make it more profitable. So getting really clear on what that vision is, what the goals are that we're trying to accomplish. And really, to me, it needs to start with quality of life. What do we really want our quality of life to look like? And that has to include time. and I'm not talking time in the business, has to include personal time, time for family, time for hobbies, time for community, church, whatever it is, but time outside of business, but also money. And the profit from the business needs to allow us to have the time to do some of the things we want to do. And that's why that's why we want to have a profitable business, is so that we can do some of the things we want to do outside of business. Granted, some of that profit might be put back into growth in the business and that kind of thing, but getting really clear on that and defining that. And then, okay, now that we know where we want to be in 3 years and a year from now let's figure out everything that has to happen to get us there. And in the case of a cattle rancher, it could be, I need to have 20% more cows than what I have today in order to reach my goal, or 50%, or I may need to double it. And some of that could be done internally on the existing ranch. Some of it we may need to lease some additional land or acquire some additional properties. So figuring out what those things are and getting real clear on it, and then the steps to get us there. And as you mentioned, there's always obstacles in those steps. And so I think too many times we gloss over the obstacles that could potentially come up and keep us from reaching the goal we're trying to reach. And then with each one this is truly an obstacle that could hit us this year. All right, well, let's brainstorm that and let's come up with a strategy around that obstacle. I was working with some people here just recently, and we went through a couple of goals, and we had 10 or 15 obstacles listed there. And we hit each one of those one by one, and we came up with a strategy of how to overcome every one of those obstacles. That way, if and when that obstacle does present itself, we already have the strategy in place to overcome it. Now, we may have to adapt it a little bit or change it a little bit, but we've gone through the thought process of what needs to happen there. Mm-hmm. And so to me, that's really, really huge. And I think that gets overlooked a lot in not just in farming and ranching, but in any small business or any goals that we have in life. We set this goal and we want to go do this, whatever this is, but we don't really look at some of the challenges, obstacles that might get in the way. And so I spend quite a bit of time with clients on that. Let's figure out what those obstacles are, and let's make sure that we have at least one strategy in place to overcome that obstacle.
Well, I think the good thing with that is the fact is if that obstacle or when that obstacle appears, it's not the first time you thought about it. You've spent some time thinking about it. That's probably a huge part. Even though you may not have a total solution at the first time you identify it, you've had some time to consider it.
Absolutely. And it's so important to go through that thought process. And, and getting back to the planning side of this and looking at it, if we're not evaluating our plan on a regular basis, and I think that needs to be monthly and maybe even weekly, if we're doing weekly plans and at the end of the week there was some things that we had prioritized on our plan that didn't get done. And, it could be, mom had a heart attack, mm-hmm. It's in the hospital, or somebody died, or there was a fire, or, got pneumonia or whatever, and so life happens. We just got to look at that and say, okay, that was a priority this week and we didn't get it done. We need to get back on the calendar for the coming week, and then do that on a monthly basis. And if something in January that we put on the calendar had to happen in January and it didn't, well, we better get it done in February or this thing will start to snowball against us. And then we'll be sitting in October, November thinking, golly sakes, we got stuff in January, February that we didn't do, and we're way behind. And so the discipline of doing the plan, but then monitoring that plan and seeing where we are. The other thing that I like to do, and I just call it bookends, when we set these blocks of time to do the planning and these big strategic things and whatever it might be. I mean, you might have a block of time, well, we're going to put a water line in on the ranch, for example, and that might be in June. It might take us 3 weeks in June to put that water line in or something. The bookend on each end of that project, and that could be a one-day project, it could be a week-long project. But anytime we do that, we need to figure out, okay, what needs to happen ahead of time so that everything's taken care of and we can focus on what we need to focus on that day or those 2 days or that week. And then at the end of that, the other bookend, okay, now what do we need to do to pick up and move forward? And if we do that in our planning and say, okay, Wednesday and Thursday next week, we're going to be doing strategic planning. So what needs to happen Monday and Tuesday at the very latest, to make sure that we're free to do that. Mm-hmm. And if it's Wednesday and Thursday, okay, what does Friday look like now for us? And what needs to happen Friday? Well, if we have that planned out with confidence, then our focus can really be on the strategic planning. Mm-hmm. And if we don't have it, and we look at the calendar with, gosh, tomorrow strategic planning, and gosh, I got these other things I need to do, and well, we said we'd do the strategic planning, let's go get it done. How focused can we be when our mind's out there on the other things that need to get done? And so being disciplined on the bookends, before and after these blocks of time that we set up, and it doesn't have to be a full day. I mean, it might be from, we're going to kick this thing off at 7 o'clock in the morning. At noon, we're going to be done with it. But that means any chores and anything else or whatever has to be taken care of the day before or before 7 o'clock in the morning. So just having that awareness and those bookends and making sure they're in place like they should be.
Yeah.
Is huge.
Yeah, that's really big. I know. I mean, you can take it simply if you've never felt this way. Trying to take a vacation is very similar to that mindset. That you can't go on vacation unless something's done, and then knowing, of course, different when on vacation you come back thinking, okay, what are all the wrecks I got to go pick up with now, right? But we shouldn't have to be that way.
Even if you're going to go to a bull sale, or a horse sale or whatever it is, or you're selling your calves and at the local auction and you want to be there when they sell, there's things that have to be done ahead of time and have to be done, when you get back. But some of those kinds of things we can kind of cram. But when it comes to strategic planning, we need to really plan ahead on that and say, okay, let's make sure that we have things done so that we can focus on these focus days and these planning days, and we're not distracted by other things.
You bet. Well, Allan, it's always too short to have an opportunity of time to visit with you. I always wish there was more time. There's more things we can definitely talk about. But before we get too far, I had brought up, as we were going into that second segment, the fact of accountability really being a big part of that. And I think that's a big part. That's why when I think of this conversation today with you, that was why I thought of you, was because you have been that part for me at different times in my life. And I think that's an important part. That's something that you do on a regular basis as a ranching consultant, a business coach to families, to producers. You've been doing it for a few years, and it's a way that guys, if they're looking to maybe kick that off, it's a way that they could do that. It was somebody like you. Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate that, Justin. I've got a 2.5-day planning workshop scheduled in the Phoenix area on January 24th, 25th, and 26th. And I was going to do one in San Antonio the following week, San Antonio, Texas, but we had a conflict there. So that's been moved to the week of March 11th. So if you want to get in 2.5 days of some really good planning and look at the obstacles and figure out the strategies around them and really figure out where you want your business to go in the next 2 to 3 years, as part of where you want to be in 5 and 10 and 15 years, call me and we'll talk to you about these workshops. The number 520-253-0040. If the timing doesn't work and you still want some help, we can talk about doing one-on-one help. Been able to do a lot of that phone and email and Zoom calls, but also have clients come travel to Arizona, meet with me here in my office, and we take care of it here. So 2 or 3 different options there, and if this kind of resonates and you feel like, hey, I could use some help in that area, reach out to me and we'll have a discussion. You bet. Well, Allan, I appreciate you joining us here today on the Working Ranch Radio Show. It's a good way to get the year started off for us here on our shows, and I'm wishing you the very best in 2024 as well. Thank you, Justin, and I hope you have a healthy and happy and very prosperous 2024 yourself. You bet. And again, my guest today, Allan Crockett, joining us here today as we talk about how we can get this new year started off on the right foot. I always appreciate his perspective as a business coach and ranch consultant that he's been doing that for many, many years. His perspective on this topic here today is very valuable. I appreciate his insight, appreciate the input that he's had in my life as well, and I hope you find some value in what we talked about here today. Well, stay with us. Coming up after the break, we're pleased to have back with us Risk Management Agency Administrator Marcia Bunger will be joining us in the next segment. Stay tuned as we're going to be talking about their Livestock Roadshow. Well, what's that all about? Stay tuned. That'll be coming up in the next segment.
There are lots of nutrition tubs out there, but none can match the True Blue commitment of Vitalix. Our tubs offer you the most concentrated nutrition at the lowest cost per day. That means more profit for your operation and improved performance for your cow herd. In fact, research shows Vitalix tubs increase feed efficiency by 20%, while boosting conception rates, herd health, and weaning weights. Learn more at Vitalix.com. Vitalix, the true blue tub.
And we welcome you back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills. I'm pleased to have with us our next guest, Risk Management Agency Administrator, Marcia Bunger. And Marcia, thanks for joining us here today on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I appreciate the fact that I'm talking with a fellow rancher myself, and that we some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about here, and that you understand it from that perspective. So I appreciate that. Let's talk about with the Risk Management Agency. Last time we had you on, we were talking about the new wean calf program that's coming out in pilot form in a few states. But let's talk about this Livestock Roadshow that's coming up, because I know that's something where you guys are going to be on the road, being out amongst producers themselves, talking about that, and fill us in on what that's going to be about.
Thank you. So last year, I'll just step back in time a little bit. We did, for the first time, we hosted a series of roadshow events for whole farm revenue and microfarm, and they were very successful. Got really good response as to the education and the information we provided. And so we circled back with that concept and thought, let's apply it to the livestock products that RMA has to offer. So we came up with a list of places that we will be in person, and I think they number probably 12. Mm-hmm. And we've had one or two now in person so far, but what's coming up in the immediate is a couple of virtual road shows. So for those folks that aren't close to those locations where we're going to meet in person, you have the opportunity to hop on and listen virtually. The information is all going to be the same, where they're covering the same topics. And so the first virtual workshop is January 8th, and that is going to be at 12 noon Central Time. The second opportunity for a virtual roadshow event is January 17th at 7 p.m. Pacific Time. And you can go on to the RMA webpage and search for the Livestock Roadshow so that you can get linked in and enter into that virtual session and learn a lot, really. We're going to be covering most of the livestock products that we have currently, and that is livestock gross margin, dairy revenue protection, livestock risk protection, and then also talk about annual forage to cover your risks that with forages that are planted annually, but then also the pasture, rangeland, and forage. We've seen just a huge amount of growth with a number of these products. Just to give you some statistics, LRP has grown 250% in the last 2 years, and that has covered about 27 million head of cattle. And then LGM, the livestock gross margin product, has grown by 600% over the last 2 years. And that has covered about 14.5 million head of cattle insured in 2023. The pasture, rangeland, and forage product now insures more acres than corn, soybeans, wheat totaled. Mm-hmm. Wow. So it has really become highly utilized. Again, RMA, USDA doesn't require that you have crop insurance, livestock products, but from personal experience, I can tell you who does require it is usually your banker. So, you'll have an opportunity to listen to subject matter experts explain these products. And you also have an opportunity, and I hope you do, ask questions, provide some feedback, because that's the only way that we've been able to continue to tweak, improve, and then also come up with new products. The latest in the suite of products is what we just announced, and what we just talked about, offline was the wean calf product, and they'll be talking about that too. So even though you may not be in a piloted state, I think it's always good to hear what's coming down the road in the event that it does get expanded to other parts of the country. Yeah.
One of the things that I would, as you were talking about this, that comes to my mind is, since this whole concept with the Risk Management Agency of offering some of these products evolve? Because they've been around for quite a while. Some of these products have been around for quite a while. There has been some changes, and I would encourage, because I was at Stock Growers meeting a month or so ago and visiting with a crop insurance salesperson there, and we were talking about this, and I said, well, man, I tried this, the rangeland deal several years ago, and, I wasn't real impressed with it. There was some, where they were measuring rain and things that wasn't really in correlation to me. And she's like, oh, there's been a lot of changes since then. And so that's would be my thought is, since the inception of these, if it was something that you tried maybe years ago on some of the pasture and rangelands, then come learn more about this, because I think you'll find there's been a lot of changes that have happened since the inception of these.
You're exactly right. LRP has been around for a while, but it's only been probably in the last 5-6 years that they've expanded the range of coverage that you can get. They've increased the subsidy. So we're continually trying to tweak and improve our products so that they are attuned to what's going on in ag today.
Yeah.
I've been ranching for over 40 years, and farming is not the same as it was in 1982 as it is today. So it's important that we don't stagnate with what we are doing at RMA, but that we continue to look at ways to adapt. And we do that, I think, in large part with folks, farmers, industry, giving us good feedback.
Yeah. One of the things, too, I think some people might be a little hesitant about looking at these products, because a lot of times there's a lot of providers out there. And I think there's maybe some hesitancy of sitting down at the table with them, wondering if they're just going to get sold something and be from a salesperson versus in this situation, it's not. Here's an information through the Livestock Roadshow, whether you want to go to the virtual sessions or you got in-person sessions all over the country. This is a point in time then where they can just go learn it without feeling like they're being pressured into it.
No, and you make an extremely important point. We're not there to sell you anything. We are there to only provide information and education. That is not RMA's role, to be a salesperson and sell you. So we are giving it to you, I think, on a very unbiased way, and looking for questions, comments, and the other resource I think that I would recommend, outside of a salesperson, a crop insurance agent, is your banker. The ag lending sector of our business is very attuned to the benefits and the need to have good coverage. And so your banker doesn't have skin in the game as far as getting a commission necessarily. So they're going to give you some pretty good advice, I think, too. So once you listen to the information, go to your banker and, say, this is what I heard about this product. What can you tell me about it? The deadline for some of these, though, has passed, so the PRF policy has passed, that deadline has passed, but, you have then now a good solid year to gather information and learn more about it. Some of these are available year round, so it's not like you're pressed for a deadline. The wean calf deadline, I believe, is the end of January. So that's quickly approaching if you're in those 4 piloted states. Annual forage might be kind of conditioned upon the area of your country again. I know for South Dakota, it's probably March 15th. But check with your current agent, or if you do not currently have an agent, I would encourage folks to go onto the RMA portal and take a look at either contacting our regional office and or our agent locator that provides you a list of agents in your area.
You bet. All right. Well, Administrator Bunger, thanks for joining us here. As we were talking about, we do have some upcoming virtual sessions, January 8th as well as January 17th. And then there are going to be regional sessions in person in Oklahoma, California, South Dakota, Illinois, Minnesota, Alaska, and Mississippi. So you're going to be within driving distance for most folks in one of those particular spots. So Administrator Bunger, thanks for joining us here again today on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. And again, that was the administrator for the Risk Management Agency, Marcia Bunger, joining us here on the program, talking about their upcoming livestock road shows. There are a couple virtual sessions that we talked about, as well as several in-person sessions. If you want to find out more information, you can go to the website at rma.usda.gov. And then from there, you'll find under the topics heading, down in there, you'll see the Livestock Roadshow. That'll give you more information should you want that. And again, if you've had any questions about what all of the programs that are offered through the Risk Management Agency, this would be a meeting that you would want to go to, or catch the virtual sessions as well. Stay with us. When we come back after the break, the Captain Tim O'Byrne will be in for this week's edition of Tim's 2 Cents, and we'll hear from meteorologist Don Day with a look at our long-term weather. We'll be back after this.
Looking for the perfect gift for a gardener or weather enthusiast? Introducing the Tropo, a precision rain gauge that has revolutionized both reliability and convenience. Expertly engineered by meteorologists, the Tropo gauge boasts rugged durability, impeccable accuracy, and precision to the 100th of an inch. Visit measurerain.com to order a Tropo today and use code RAINDAY. That's RAINDAY for free shipping and 10% off. Go to measurerain.com.
Welcome back. Before we bring on the captain for this week's edition of Tim's 2 Cents here on the Working Ranch Radio Show, might mention just a couple things that be looking for the next issue of Working Ranch magazine that'll be coming out. And we're just on the front end here. I know we had the first part of bull sale season is in the fall, but then there's a little break here between at the holiday seasons. We're going to get back into it. And if you want one publication that you can get through and flip through and see a lot of the different bull sales that'll be taking place, Working Ranch magazine is the one you want to turn to. You can get your subscription started by going to workingranchmag.com. It's easy to do it there. By the way, be looking for Working Ranch magazine booth at the CattleCon convention going on in Orlando, coming up the end of this month, first part of next month. Well, now it's time to check in with the Captain Tim O'Byrne. He is publisher and editor of Working Ranch magazine for this week's edition of Tim's 2 Cents.
Hey, Justin. Hey, everybody out there in Working Ranch Radio Land. Happy New Year. Hope everything's going good for you. Interesting winter out there. Kind of some sad news from over the holiday season. Our good friend Kurt Pate, who a lot of us know as part of the BQA low-stress cattle handling demonstration team, Ron Gill, Dean Fish, Todd McCartney. His wife, the amazing Tammy Pate, passed away shortly before Christmas after a long battle with cancer. And she was such a great gal. She was behind the Art of the Cowgirl. A lot of folks know what that is. So we're sending our prayers and compassion to the family as they deal with this. And God bless you all. Back to you, Justin.
All right. Thanks, Captain. And thanks for bringing that to the forefront. Definitely somebody that made a big impact on a lot of folks' lives. And I had seen that news come across my Facebook feed right before Christmas, and thinking of the family during this time as well. Well, as we switch gears, let's check in now with meteorologist Don Day as we take a look at our long-term weather. And Don, we've known as mild as our winter has been for a lot of us, maybe not for everybody in the country, but for a lot of folks, we knew at some point we're going to see winter start to happen, and that is what it looks like. We've seen a pretty good cold air mass now in the north, and it looks like it's going to be shifting and heading into the U.S.
Yeah, I would call this a pretty large shift in the weather on our side of the hemisphere of the caliber we haven't really seen yet this winter. In previous interviews that we've had here over the last few weeks, we talked about that there was a lot of cold air in parts of Europe and Asia and Siberia that just was locked up on the other side of the globe. Well, now we're building that cold air onto this side of the globe, and we have a pattern commencing, which is likely going to allow some very cold air to build up over the higher latitudes of Northwest Canada, the North Slope of Alaska, and then have the opportunity to move into the lower 48 states. You throw that colder air mass settling into the lower 48 states, including Canada, and you add the impacts of a more moist southerly jet stream because of what's going on with El Nino, It's a gas and matches scenario where when we put these two air masses together, it's going to be producing a lot of winter weather. There's going to be a large part of the U.S. that's going to see the first significant snows of the season, especially parts of the Midwest, Corn Belt, and Great Lakes, but also even the East Coast and northeastern United States. We could see severe cold head into parts of the Northern Rockies and Northern Plains as well. And it's going to be a period of wintry weather that's going to have some legs to it, meaning it could go a couple weeks long.
Mm-hmm. I noticed in a previous podcast last week that you were putting out that it looks like a majority of the snow or some of the cold's still going to be in a lot of different areas, but where we're seeing snowfall is kind of a Corn Belt thing. And you just mentioned that a bit ago, but that's kind of what you're starting to see.
Yeah, because what'll happen, Arctic air masses naturally don't have a lot of water in them. One principle of weather forecasting and just the way the physics of the atmosphere works, the colder the air is, the less water vapor can be in that air. So you can have a big polar outbreak, Arctic air careening into the nation, but it won't bring with it a lot of snow. It'll bring some. But where you have that Arctic air mass colliding with the more moist air masses that come up out of the south is where you're going to tend to see the heavier snow potential, where you can see those two air masses working together. Mm-hmm. So that's why the boundary area between the Arctic air and that El Nino-driven warmer air in the southern areas of the U.S. is going to set up a battleground. And that's where some of these bigger storms are going to form. And they'll be suppressed fairly far south. I mean, over the past week, we saw it snow again in parts of New Mexico and Arizona and parts of Kansas and the Texas Panhandle area. Areas don't normally see a lot of snow. They're going to get into the action as well.
Mm-hmm. What about the West Coast? I know they've been getting a lot of moisture in the fall of the year. Now, as we start to make that cycle over, it looked like even in this one, a little bit of moisture in this.
Yeah, the last couple of weeks has been productive for California, seeing some really good rainfall and some snow in the high country. One question mark we do have with the West Coast is, will some of this Arctic air spill over the divide and all the way to the coastal areas? And something we've got to watch very carefully, because if the cold air gets far enough west, we could not only see rain and snow move into some of those areas, but freezing temperatures as well.
Okay. All right. And then real quick, how far south are we talking some of these cold temperatures? I know the map that I saw was really about the only thing that looked somewhat average to normal was Florida. But how far south are we looking at some of these cold temps?
Well, that's a good question. Well, certainly it is on the table that this Arctic air could go all the way to the Gulf Coast. Now, it's a possibility that that southern jet stream could modify things a little bit, but I don't think anybody is going to be in a situation that they're going to miss everything. I think this cold air is going to be expansive enough to get just about everybody, and that includes Florida.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll get braced for it, and ready or not, here it comes.
It was bound to happen.
All right. Thanks, Don.
Thank you.
And you can catch meteorologist Don Day each and every morning through his daily video podcast at dayweather.com, where you can find his channel on YouTube as well. Stay with us after the break. I'll tell you what's in store for next week's edition when we return on the Working Ranch Radio Show. You're going to want to join us next week on the Working Ranch Radio Show. Our subject is beef on dairy. And I know if you're a rancher like myself, you have a lot of thoughts or questions, maybe even have some concerns about the growth that we are seeing in this segment. Well, we're going to be joined by none other than Dr. Ty Lawrence from West Texas A&M University. He is one of the foremost knowledgeable people when it comes to this subject, and I'm looking forward to sharing this conversation with you as we get down to the nitty-gritty. We're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of beef on dairy. So be sure to join us next week on the Working Ranch Radio Show. By the way, if you missed something today or you want to go back and listen to any old episodes, you can go to our podcast website at workingranchradio.com or any podcast provider out there as well. The Working Ranch Radio Show is a production of Working Ranch Magazine, branded #1 by America's Ranchers. My email address, if you'd like to get a hold of me, is justin.workingranch@gmail.com. Thanks for joining us. I'm Justin Mills, and until next time, keep your chin down and your mind in the middle. So long.